I never expected my life to change at a music festival, especially not while standing in line for overpriced lemonade. But that's where I met Ethan Miller, and looking back now, I wish I'd stayed thirsty. My name is Riley, and I'm a night shift nurse at Memorial Hospital. That Saturday was my first day off in 2 weeks, and my best friend Jessica had practically dragged me to the Summer Sound Festival. "You can't keep hiding in your scrubs," she'd insisted. "The world needs to see those legs." The August heat was brutal, and sweat trickled down my back as I shifted from foot to foot in the endless drink line. That's when I heard it, someone humming "Dream On" by Aerosmith. Not the kind of song you'd expect at a modern music festival. "Finally, someone with good taste," I said, turning around. And there he was, tall and lean with kind eyes that crinkled at the corners when he smiled. "You know Aerosmith?" he asked, looking pleasantly surprised. "Know them? I have their entire vinyl collection, thanks to my grandmother's obsession with Steven Tyler." His face lit up. "Vinyl? Now that's impressive." "I'm Ethan, by the way." We ended up sharing that overpriced lemonade, sitting cross-legged on a patch of grass while some indie band played in the background. Ethan worked in finance, loved classic rock, and had the most infectious laugh I'd ever heard. "So, night shift nurse?" he said, raising an eyebrow. "That must be intense." "It has its moments. Last week, I had a patient who was convinced the hospital ghost was stealing his Jell-O." "Was it?" "No, it was his roommate. But I didn't have the heart to tell him." Jessica found us there hours later, her eyes widening when she saw us together. She gave me that look, the one that said we'd be having a detailed conversation later. "Riley, there you are," she exclaimed, then not so subtly checked Ethan out. "And who's this?" Before I could answer, a sharp voice cut through our conversation. "Ethan? Ethan Miller, is that you?" A well-dressed woman in her 50s approached us, her designer sandals somehow immaculate despite the dusty festival grounds. Ethan's smile faltered slightly. "Mother," he said, standing up quickly. "I didn't expect to see you here." "Clearly," she replied, her eyes scanning over me with the precision of a laser. "Linda Miller," she introduced herself, though she didn't offer to shake hands. "I'm on the festival's board of directors." Something in her tone made me feel like I should apologize, though I wasn't sure for what. Sitting on the ground? Talking to her son? Existing? "Nice to meet you, Mrs. Miller," I said, getting to my feet. "I'm Riley Thompson." Was her only response before turning back to Ethan. "Darling, the Hendersons are here. You remember Caroline, their daughter? She's just finished her residency at Mayo Clinic." I watched Ethan's jaw tighten slightly. "Mother, I'm actually in the middle of something here." The tension crackled between them like static electricity. Linda's perfectly lined lips pressed into a thin smile. "Of course you are, dear. We'll catch up later." As she walked away, Ethan turned to me with an apologetic look. "I'm sorry about that. My mother can be intense." "No worries," I said, though something cold had settled in my stomach. "All mothers are protective." "Yeah," he replied, but his eyes followed his mother's retreating figure. Then he surprised me by pulling out his phone. "Can I get your number? Maybe we could continue this conversation somewhere with less parental supervision." I laughed and gave it to him, ignoring Jessica's excited bouncing beside me. As I watched him walk away, I had no idea I'd just met both the love of my life and the source of its greatest upheaval. But that's the thing about life-changing moments, they rarely come with warning labels. That night, I fell asleep to Aerosmith's "Dream On" playing on my grandmother's old record player, completely unaware that my own dreams were about to become a lot more complicated. After 3 months of dating Ethan, I found myself standing in front of the Miller family mansion, gripping a bottle of wine so tightly my knuckles turned white. The house loomed over me like a judge's bench, all perfectly trimmed hedges and gleaming windows. "Ready?" Ethan squeezed my hand, but his smile seemed strained. We'd delayed this formal family dinner for weeks, but Linda Miller's requests had become increasingly difficult to dodge. A uniformed housekeeper opened the door before we could ring the bell. Inside, everything sparkled like a museum where you're afraid to touch anything. Family photos lined the walls, all featuring Ethan in pressed suits at various ages, usually standing next to his mother. Linda Miller swept into the foyer wearing a designer dress that probably cost more than 3 months of my salary. "Darling," she air-kissed Ethan's cheeks, then turned to me. "And Riley. That's an interesting choice of dress." I glanced down at my navy cocktail dress, the nicest thing I owned. "Thank you for having me, Mrs. Miller." "Linda, please." She waved us toward the dining room. "Though I suppose we should wait to see if you'll be around long enough for such informalities." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Mother, I'm only teasing, darling. Caroline Henderson was asking about you the other day. The dining room could have hosted a state dinner." Mr. Miller, a quiet man with Ethan's kind eyes, nodded to us from behind his newspaper. "So, Riley," Linda began as the first course arrived, "Ethan tells me you're a nurse. At Memorial, isn't it? Not exactly Massachusetts General, but I suppose we all have to start somewhere." I forced a smile. "I love Memorial, actually. We have an excellent trauma unit." "And what does your family do?" I don't believe Ethan mentioned. "My grandmother raised me. She owned a record store." Linda's eyebrows arched. "A record store? How quaint. And your parents?" "Mother," Ethan interrupted sharply, "Riley's grandmother is amazing. You should hear her vinyl collection." "Yes, well." Linda delicately cut into her salmon. "I suppose some people find that sort of thing charming. Though Ethan, darling, you really should consider the Morgan Stanley position Charles mentioned. The salary would be much more suitable for starting a family." I nearly choked on my wine. We'd been dating 3 months, and suddenly we're discussing families? "Actually," I said, finding my voice, "Ethan mentioned he loves his current job. The smaller firm allows for more creative investment strategies." Linda's smile could have frozen hell. "Oh, and you're well-versed in investment banking strategies?" I understand enough to know that happiness matters more than prestige. The silence that followed was deafening. Mr. Miller suddenly seemed very interested in his potatoes. "Happiness," Linda finally said, "doesn't pay for private school tuition or summer homes in the Hamptons. But perhaps such considerations aren't priorities in your circle." Ethan's hand found mine under the table. "I think Riley's right, Mother. I'm happy where I am." Something flickered across Linda's face, surprise, maybe anger. "Well, if you're content with mediocrity." "I should check on dessert," the housekeeper interrupted, clearly sensing the tension. As she hurried out, Linda turned to me with a practiced smile. "Riley, dear, would you help me in the kitchen? I'd love to share my creme brulee recipe." In the kitchen, Linda closed the door behind us. "Let me be clear," she said, her voice low and precise. "My son has potential. Real potential. He doesn't need someone holding him back with small-town contentment and vinyl records." I met her gaze. "With all due respect, Mrs. Miller, Ethan is an adult who can make his own choices." "Can he?" She laughed softly. "Oh, sweet girl. You have no idea what you're walking into. But you will." Later that night, as Ethan drove me home, I couldn't shake the chill from Linda's words. He apologized repeatedly for his mother's behavior, but something felt off. Like he was apologizing not just for tonight, but for something yet to come. "Stay over?" he asked when we reached my apartment. I hesitated, remembering Linda's warning. But when he smiled, that same warm smile from the festival, I pushed my doubts aside. I didn't know it then, but that dinner was just the opening move in Linda Miller's carefully orchestrated game. And I had just become her favorite piece to play with. The first sign that my marriage was crumbling appeared on an ordinary Tuesday morning, 6 months after our wedding. I found Ethan's phone buzzing on our kitchen counter while he was in the shower. The screen lit up with a text from Linda. "The Henderson party tonight. Don't forget what we discussed." I shouldn't have looked. But after months of Ethan's late nights at work and increasingly distant behavior, something inside me snapped. I picked up the phone. The message thread with his mother was a novel of manipulation. "Caroline will be there. Remember your future. Riley doesn't understand our world. And most recently, the trust fund conditions are clear. Darling." The shower stopped running. I placed the phone exactly where I'd found it, my hands shaking. "Hey, babe," Ethan said, emerging in his suit. "I might be late tonight. Big client meeting." I studied his face, searching for signs of the man I'd met at the festival. The Henderson party, you mean? He froze for a fraction of a second. How did you? Your mother texted. I kept my voice steady. Want to tell me about the trust fund conditions? Riley. He ran a hand through his damp hair. It's complicated. Try me. My grandfather's trust fund. There are certain expectations. Career benchmarks, social obligations. He wouldn't meet my eyes. Marriage requirements. The word hit like a slap. Requirements? Mother's just concerned about our future. The trust vests when I turn 33, but only if. Only if what, Ethan? Only if you marry someone from the right social circle? Someone like Caroline Henderson. His silence was answer enough. So what was I? Practice? A rebellion against mommy. No. He reached for me, but I stepped back. I love you. But maybe we rushed into marriage. Mother thinks. I don't care what your mother thinks. The words exploded out of me. I care what you think. What you want. I want. He checked his watch. I can't do this right now. I have to get to work. That evening, I called Jessica. Come over. Bring wine. She arrived with 2 bottles and a concerned expression. Spill. I told her everything, the texts, the trust fund, the way Ethan had been withdrawing for months. That manipulative witch, Jessica muttered. And Ethan's just letting her pull his strings? There's more. I pulled out the bank statement I'd found while stress cleaning. Look at these charges. Private clubs, expensive restaurants, jewelry stores, all while he's been telling me we need to budget carefully. Jessica whistled. Holy shit. These dates. Riley, these are on nights he said he was working late. My stomach churned. I know. What are you going to do? Before I could answer, my phone buzzed. A text from Linda. Dinner tomorrow. Just us girls. We need to discuss Ethan's future. Jessica read it over my shoulder. Don't go. It's obviously a trap. No, I said slowly, an idea forming. I think I should hear what she has to say. Riley. I've been playing defense since day one with her. Maybe it's time I changed the game. My phone buzzed again. This time from Ethan, working late again. Don't wait up. I thought about the man who'd hummed Aerosmith in a festival line, who'd made me believe in instant connections. Then I thought about the man who'd let his mother orchestrate our entire relationship, who was probably sitting across from Caroline Henderson right now. You know what the worst part is? I told Jessica, pouring more wine. I actually thought love would be enough. That if I just loved him enough, he'd choose me over his mother's manipulation. So what now? I looked at Linda's text again. Now? Now I find out exactly what the Miller family has to lose. And then I decide if it's worth taking from them. Jessica's eyes widened. That doesn't sound like you. Maybe it's time I stopped being so nice. I raised my glass. After all, Linda Miller wanted to teach me about her world. I think I'm finally ready to learn. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was about to become exactly what Linda had accused me of being, a threat to her perfect world. And for the first time since this whole mess began, I was looking forward to proving her right. The lunch with Linda Miller was set for noon at LeBlanc, the kind of restaurant where the menu doesn't list prices. I arrived early, armed with the flash drive containing copies of Ethan's bank statements and text messages. My wedding ring felt heavy on my finger. Linda was already there, perfectly coiffed in Chanel. Riley, dear. So glad you could make it. Wouldn't miss it. I sat down, noting how she'd positioned herself to face the other diners, always performing for an audience. I'll be direct, she said after ordering a $60 salad. This situation with Ethan isn't working. Which situation? The marriage you never wanted, or the secret meetings with Caroline Henderson? Her pause was barely noticeable, but I caught it. I see Ethan's been sharing our private conversations. Actually, he hasn't shared anything. That's part of the problem. The waiter arrived with our drinks. I watched Linda take a deliberate sip of her mineral water, her diamond tennis bracelet catching the light. Marriage is complicated, dear. Especially in our circles. There are expectations, obligations. Like the trust fund conditions? Another slight pause. Ethan told you about that? He did. right after I found out about the secret credit cards and the jewelry store charges. I leaned forward. Tell me, Linda, does Caroline Henderson wear the necklace he bought last month, or is that saved for special occasions? Her carefully maintained facade cracked for just a moment. You've been snooping. I've been paying attention. Something you taught me, remember? At that first dinner, when you said I had no idea what I was walking into. Then you understand why this needs to end quietly. She reached for her purse. I'm prepared to be generous. A clean break, no messy divorce proceedings. She slid an envelope across the table. Inside was a check with enough zeros to make my head spin. That's your offer? Money to disappear. It's more than fair. Certainly more than you'd get in a divorce, especially with a prenup. I pulled out my phone and pulled up a banking app. Interesting number. Almost exactly what Ethan's been spending on his extracurricular activities. Linda's eyes narrowed. What are you implying? Nothing yet. But I wonder what the trust fund board would think about these expenses. Or the partners at his firm. You wouldn't dare. Try me. I stood up, dropping my napkin on the untouched salad. Oh, and you can keep your check. I'm not interested in being paid off. Don't be foolish, Riley. You can't win this. Maybe not. But I can make sure everyone loses. I was halfway to the door when her voice stopped me. He'll never choose you over family. Over his future. I turned back. You know what's funny, Linda? I used to think this was about money or social status. But it's not, is it? It's about control. You're terrified of losing it. You have no idea what you're talking about. Don't I? Because I just got a very interesting call from your husband's secretary. Apparently, Mr. Miller's been making some interesting moves with the family foundation. Moves you don't know about. The color drained from her face. You're bluffing. Am I? Guess you'll find out at the next board meeting. I smiled. Have a lovely lunch, Linda. Give my best to Caroline. Outside, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely text Jessica, it's done. Her reply came instantly. Did she buy it? Hook, line, and sinker. Your friend at the foundation came through. Oh yeah. Linda's going to have a very interesting week trying to figure out what her husband's supposedly doing. I got into my car just as Linda emerged from the restaurant, already on her phone. Phase 1 complete. Now to wait for the chaos as she tried to maintain control of her perfect world while chasing shadows I'd created. That evening, Ethan called. Mother's acting strange. Said something about Dad and the foundation? Really? How weird. I watched our wedding photo on the mantle, remembering the man I thought I'd married. Hey, how was that client dinner last night? Fine. Nothing special. I fingered the receipt in my pocket from the jewelry store, dated last night. Glad to hear it. Sleep well, honey. As I hung up, I realized I didn't feel sad anymore. Just determined. Linda Miller had taught me well, sometimes the best revenge isn't about destruction. It's about making people destroy themselves. The vinyl record spun quietly in my grandmother's living room, Aerosmith's Dream On filling the space between us. Edna Thompson sat in her favorite armchair, her silver hair catching the afternoon light, while I curled up on her worn leather couch. So, she said, setting down her tea, you've declared war on the Millers. I hadn't told her everything, but Grandma Edna had always read me like one of her vintage album covers. Not war exactly. Just. Evening the score. She adjusted her reading glasses. And how's that working out for you? Before I could answer, my phone buzzed. Another text from Ethan. We need to talk. Mother's asking questions about Dad's foundation. Let me guess, Grandma said, watching my face. The dominoes are falling? I showed her the text. Linda's paranoid, Ethan's confused, and I trailed off, not sure how to finish that sentence. Losing yourself? The words hit harder than I expected. I'm just giving them a taste of their own medicine. Grandma stood up, walking to her old filing cabinet. You know what the problem with revenge is? It's like covering Aerosmith with a kazoo. You might make noise, but you lose the music. They deserve it, I insisted. You should see how Linda treats people, how Ethan just follows along. Oh, I believe you. She pulled out a folder, yellowed with age. But there's something you should see. Inside was a stack of documents, investment statements, property deeds, and a trust agreement with my name on it. What is this? Insurance. She sat back down. When your mother left and your father followed, I promised myself you'd never be trapped by anyone's money. I've been investing a portion of the record store's profits for years in your name. My hands shook as I read the numbers. This is substantial. Enough to walk away. Start fresh. She leaned forward. The question is, what do you really want, Riley? Revenge? Or freedom? My phone buzzed again. Linda, this time, we need to discuss these allegations immediately. I want them to hurt like I hurt, I whispered, but the words felt hollow. And then what? Grandma's voice was gentle. Will it fix what's broken? I thought about the hours I'd spent plotting, the satisfaction of watching Linda squirm at lunch, the hollow victory of catching Ethan in his lies. I'm so tired, Grandma. I know, sweetheart. She took my hand. You know what your grandfather used to say? The best revenge is a life well lived. Cliché as hell, but he wasn't wrong. Another text from Ethan, please come home. We can fix this. Can we? I murmured to myself. Grandma stood up, walking to her record collection. You remember when you first heard this song? You said it made you feel like anything was possible. The familiar chorus filled the room. Dream until your dreams come true. What are your dreams now, Riley? Not the revenge fantasies, your real dreams. I closed my eyes, letting the music wash over me. For the first time in months, I felt something shift inside, not the sharp edge of anger, but something clearer, cleaner. I want out, I realized. Not just from the marriage, but from their whole world of manipulation and control. Then maybe it's time to change the record. Grandma handed me the trust documents. You don't have to play their game anymore. My phone buzzed one final time. Jessica, Linda's called an emergency foundation meeting. What's our next move? I stared at the message, then at the trust papers in my hand. The choice crystallized. I could keep orchestrating chaos in the Miller family, or I could walk away and build something new. You're right, I told Grandma, picking up my phone. But instead of responding to any of the messages, I opened my banking app and began transferring funds to a new account. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about destroying someone else's world. Sometimes it's about building your own. Want to help me apartment hunt? I asked Grandma. She smiled, turning up the volume on Dream On. That's my girl. The war with the Millers wasn't over, but for the first time, I realized I didn't need to win it. I just needed to leave it behind. I stood in our bedroom, packing a suitcase, when Ethan burst through the door. His usually perfect hair was disheveled, tie askew. Behind him, Linda Miller swept in like an avenging angel in Chanel. What have you done? Ethan demanded, waving his phone. The foundation board is launching an investigation. Dad's being questioned by lawyers. I folded another sweater. Funny how secrets have a way of coming out. This isn't a game, Riley. Linda's voice could have frozen hell. You've put the entire Miller legacy at risk. Legacy? I laughed, but it came out hollow. Is that what we're calling it now? Where are you going? Ethan noticed the suitcase. We need to fix this. Fix what exactly? I turned to face them. The foundation mess? Your secret meetings with Caroline? Or maybe the credit card bills for jewelry I never received. Linda stepped forward. Whatever you think you know. I know everything. I pulled out my phone, showing them the screen. Every transaction, every text, every lie. Would you like to see the receipts? The board certainly did. Ethan's face went pale. You sent them to the board? Actually, I didn't. I zipped up the suitcase. But interesting that you assumed I would. Guilty conscience. Stop playing games, Linda snapped. What do you want? Money? Position on the board. I wanted a husband who chose me. A family that accepted me. My voice cracked slightly. Guess we all end up disappointed sometimes. Ethan moved closer, his expression softening. Baby, please. We can work this out. I'll do better. For a moment, I almost believed him. Then his phone buzzed, and I caught Caroline's name on the screen. You should get that, I said quietly. Wouldn't want to keep her waiting. This is ridiculous, Linda interrupted. Ethan, handle your wife before she destroys everything we've built. Handle me? I wheeled on her. I'm not one of your charity projects or social connections. I'm a person who loved your son enough to fight for him, even when he wouldn't fight for himself. Then why are you leaving? Ethan's voice was small, almost childlike. Because loving you shouldn't hurt this much. I grabbed my suitcase, but Linda blocked the door. If you walk out now, you'll get nothing. The prenup. Keep your money. I pulled out Grandma's trust documents. I have something better. My freedom. That's when Ethan grabbed my arm. Wait, please. I'll tell Caroline it's over. I'll stand up to Mother. Just don't go. For a heartbeat, I wavered. Then I noticed Linda's slight smile, watching her son manipulate me just as she'd taught him. You know what's sad? I pulled away gently. I actually believe you mean that right now. But tomorrow or next week, you'll be right back under her thumb, and I'll be right back here, wondering why I'm never enough. Riley, I release you, Ethan. From the guilt, the promises, all of it. Go live the life your mother planned. Marry Caroline. Get your trust fund. Just let me go. This isn't over, Linda warned as I reached the door. Actually, it is. I turned back one last time. But don't worry. I won't expose the foundation or your family secrets. Not because you deserve the protection, but because I deserve peace. I made it to my car before the tears started. Through the window, I could see them arguing in the doorway, mother and son, locked in their eternal dance of control and submission. My phone buzzed, Jessica offering refuge, Grandma checking in. Even Mr. Miller sending a surprisingly kind message about understanding the need to break free. But it was the last text that broke me, a photo from Linda showing Ethan and Caroline at dinner last week. His hand holding the jewelry box I'd found the receipt for. Just thought you should know what you're walking away from, the caption read. I started the car, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the wheel. In my rearview mirror, our house, my prison, grew smaller. The cruelest part wasn't leaving. It was realizing that despite everything, despite the betrayal and manipulation, a part of me still loved the man I'd met at that music festival. But that man was gone, if he'd ever really existed at all. I turned up the radio, letting Aerosmith drown out my thoughts. Sometimes rock bottom isn't a crash, it's a quiet drive away from everything you thought your life would be. 3 weeks after I left, Ethan showed up at my night shift at Memorial Hospital. He looked terrible, unshaven, suit wrinkled, eyes haunted. I found him waiting by the nurse's station at 3 a.m., clutching a familiar vinyl record. You can't be here, I said, turning to check my patient charts. I left Caroline. His voice was rough. Told Mother I'm not taking the Morgan Stanley position. The trust fund. I don't want it anymore. I kept writing, refusing to look up. Congratulations on finally making a decision. Riley, please. I'm trying to fix things. There's nothing to fix. I moved to walk past him, but he blocked my path. I found this in our closet. He held up the Aerosmith record from the day we met. Remember what you said when I first hummed the song? Sir, a security guard approached. Is there a problem here? Before I could answer, Linda Miller's voice cut through the quiet hospital corridor. There you are, darling. My stomach dropped. She walked toward us in designer heels that had no business being in a hospital at 3 a.m., her face a mask of concerned motherly love. Mother, don't, Ethan warned. I'm just here to help. She turned to me. Riley, dear, you've made your point. But this little drama has gone on long enough. I laughed, the sound echoing off the sterile walls. Drama? Is that what you call your son's affair? His lies. We all make mistakes. She reached for her purse. I'm prepared to be generous. Name your price. Mrs. Miller, I kept my voice professional, aware of my colleagues watching. This is a hospital. People are trying to heal here. Exactly. She smiled. So let's heal this family. Ethan's agreed to counseling. Haven't you, darling? Ethan stepped away from his mother. No, Mother. That's what you decided I should do. Just like you decided about Caroline, about my job, about every aspect of my life. I decided? Her voice rose slightly. I gave you everything. Both of you. And this is how you repay me. By wanting to live our own lives? I challenged. By refusing to be puppets in your perfect family theater? You ungrateful. Mother, stop. Ethan's voice was different, stronger. Riley's right. About everything. I let you control me because I was afraid. Afraid of failing, of disappointing you, of being alone. But looking at you now, I realize I'm more alone following your script than I ever would be choosing my own path. Linda's facade cracked. You're confused. That girl has poisoned. That girl loved me enough to walk away rather than watch me destroy myself trying to be your perfect son. He placed the vinyl record on the nurse's station. I don't want your money, Mother. I don't want your connections or your plans. I want. He trailed off, looking lost. You want what? I asked softly. I want to find out who I am without all of it, without her voice in my head. He turned to his mother. I'm sorry, Mother, but I'm done. Linda's hand trembled as she gripped her purse. You'll regret this. Both of you. No, I said, finally meeting her eyes. The only regret would be continuing to let you puppet master our lives. Go home, Mrs. Miller. Your audience has left the theater. She stared at us for a long moment, then turned and walked away, her heels clicking into silence. Ethan touched the vinyl record. I really did love you, you know. Still do. I know. I picked up my charts. But love isn't enough. We both need to figure out who we are without other people's expectations defining us. Will you ever forgive me? I already have. I smiled sadly. But forgiveness doesn't mean we belong together. He nodded, understanding in his eyes for maybe the first time. For what it's worth, I'm glad you were stronger than I was. Strong enough to walk away. We all have our moments of strength, Ethan. This, I gestured to where his mother had stood. This was yours. He touched my hand briefly, then walked away, leaving the record behind. I traced its familiar cover, remembering that day at the festival when anything seemed possible. Sometimes the biggest plot twist isn't in how we tear things apart, but in how we finally learn to let them go. 1 year later, I stood in front of my grandmother's record store, now mine, watching the morning sun reflect off the newly painted sign. Thompson's Vinyl and Vintage. Inside, Jessica arranged displays while Grandma Edna supervised from her favorite armchair, both preparing for our grand reopening. The bell chimed, and I looked up to see Linda Miller standing in the doorway. Interesting career change, she said, looking around. From nurse to shopkeeper. I still nurse part-time. I continued unpacking records. Turns out you can build more than one dream at a time. She moved closer, running a manicured finger along a shelf. Ethan's in therapy. Did you know? I heard. Through mutual friends, I'd learned he'd moved to Seattle. Started fresh. Good for him. He's different now. She picked up a vinyl, examining it. We both are, I suppose. I stopped unpacking, finally looking at her properly. The designer outfit was still there, but something had softened in her face. Why are you here, Mrs. Miller? Linda, she corrected quietly. And I'm here because I owe you an apology. Grandma Edna straightened in her chair, watching like a hawk. I was wrong. Linda continued. About you, about what Ethan needed, about everything, really. Losing control of my perfect world was my greatest fear. Until I actually lost it. And now I'm learning that letting go doesn't mean losing everything. Sometimes it means gaining something real. She placed an envelope on the counter. The foundation board wanted you to have this. Inside was a grant proposal. The Miller Foundation would like to partner with Thompson's Vinyl and Vintage for a youth music education program. Why? Because sometimes the best way forward is to help others find their own path. She smiled slightly. Something you taught both me and my son. The bell chimed again. A teenage girl walked in, heading straight for the classic rock section. Can I help you find anything? I asked. Just browsing. My mom used to love vinyl. She picked up an Aerosmith record. Is this any good? Linda and I exchanged a look. Why don't you give it a listen? I suggested, moving to the turntable. Sometimes the best discoveries happen by chance. As Dream On filled the store, I watched the girl's face light up with that same wonder I'd felt years ago. Linda moved toward the door. Riley, she paused. Thank you for breaking our perfect facade. It needed to break for us to heal. After she left, Grandma wheeled over. Well, that was unexpected. Life usually is. I helped the teenage girl find more classics, remembering my own first encounters with vinyl. That's what makes it interesting. Later that evening, as I closed up shop, I found a small package wrapped in brown paper. Inside was a framed photo from the music festival where I'd met Ethan, caught by some random photographer, two strangers sharing lemonade. Full of hope and possibility. A note fell out. Some memories are worth keeping, even if the story ends differently than we planned. I placed the photo on my office shelf, next to the business license and the grant proposal. Not as a reminder of what I'd lost, but of how far I'd come. Jessica appeared with takeout. You okay? Yeah. I smiled, realizing I meant it. You know what's funny? A year ago, I thought revenge would heal me. Then I thought leaving would heal me. And now I know that healing isn't about what you do to others or even what you run from. It's about what you build for yourself. Through the window, I watched that teenage girl walking away, clutching her first vinyl record like a treasure. Sometimes the best revenge isn't about destroying someone else's world or even proving them wrong. Sometimes it's about building something so beautiful from the ashes that they're forced to question why they tried to limit you in the first place. I turned the sign to closed and put on Dream on one last time, letting the music fill the empty store. Tomorrow would bring new customers, new stories, new beginnings. And for the first time in a long time, I was ready for whatever came next. Some dreams die so better ones can take root. And sometimes, just sometimes, those new dreams sound even sweeter than the original melody.